Be right back.
Watched Eilil, and maybe Aniala as well. But he watched Rand without doubt. Rand was unsure whether they still feared to take the blame if he was killed, or simply wanted to see it happen. The one thing he was certain of was that if they did want him dead, he would give them no opportunity. Who knows a woman's heart? Lews Therin chuckled wryly. He sounded in one of his saner moods. Most women will shrug off what a man would kill you for, and kill you for what a man would shrug off. Rand ignored him. The last gateway in Rand's sight winked out. The Ashaman mounting their horses were too far for him to say for sure whether any still held on to Saidin, but it did not matter so long as he did. Clumsy Deshiva tried to mount quickly and nearly fell off twice before successfully reaching his saddle. Most of the black-coated men in view began riding north or south. The rest of the nobles gathered quickly with Bashir on the slope, just below Rand, the highest ranking and those with the most power in front, after a little jostling here and there, where precedence remained uncertain. Tehera and Marcolin kept their horses on the fringes, on opposite sides of the mass of nobles, faces carefully blank. They might be asked for advice, but both knew the final decisions rested with others. Wyraman opened his mouth with a grand gesture, doubtless to begin another splendid peroration on the glories of following the Dragon Reborn. Sunaman and Torian, accustomed to his speeches and powerful enough to take no care around him, reined their horses together and began talking quietly. Sunaman's face wore an unaccustomed hardness, and Torian seemed ready to squabble over a boundary line, despite the red satin stripes on his coat sleeves. Square-jawed Bertome and some of the other Kyrianen were not quiet at all, laughing at each other's jokes. Everyone had had a bellyful of Wyraman's grand declamations. Though Samaradrid's scowl deepened every time he looked at Eilil and Aniala, he did not like them remaining close to Rand, especially his countrywoman. So perhaps his sourness had more root than Wyraman's windiness. "About 10 miles from us," Rand said loudly, "a good 50,000 men are preparing to march." They were aware of that, but it pulled every eye to him and silenced every tongue. Wyraman's mouth snapped shut sourly. The fellow did love to hear himself talk. Gwayam and Marakan, tugging at sharp-oiled beards, smiled in anticipation. The fools. Samaradrid looked like a man who had eaten an entire bowl of bad plums. Gregorin and the 3 lords of the 9 with him merely wore grim determination on their faces. Not fools. The scouts saw no signs of Suldan or Damani, Rand went on. But even without them, even with Ashaman, that's enough to kill a lot of us if anybody forgets the plan. No one will forget, though, I'm sure. No charges without orders this time. He'd made that clear as glass and hard as stone. No herring off because you thought maybe you just might have seen something either. Wyriman smiled, managing to put as much oil into it as Sunaman ever could. It was a simple plan in its way. They would advance west in 5 columns, each with Ashaman, and attempt to fall on the Shanshan from every side at once. Or as close to all sides as could be managed. Simple plans were best, Bashir insisted. If you won't be satisfied with a whole litter of fat piglets, he had muttered, if you have to rush into the woods to find the old sow, then don't get too fancy or she'll gut you. No plan of battle survives first contact, Lews Therin said in Rand's head. For a moment, he still seemed lucid. For a moment. Something is wrong, he growled suddenly. His voice began to gain intensity and drift into wild, disbelieving laughter. It can't be wrong, but it is. Something strange. Something wrong. Skittering, jumping, twitching. His cackles turned to weeping. It can't be. I must be mad. And he vanished before Rand could mute him. Burn him. There was nothing wrong with the plan, or Bashir would have been on it like a duck on a beetle. Lews Therin was mad, no doubt of it, but so long as Randall Thor remained sane. A bitter joke on the world if the Dragon Reborn went mad before the last battle even began. Take your places, he commanded with a wave of the dragon scepter. He had to fight down the urge to laugh at that joke. The large clump of nobles broke apart at his order, milling and muttering as they sorted themselves out. Few liked the way Rand had divided them up. Whatever breaking down of barriers had occurred in the shock of the first fight in the mountains, they had sprung up again almost immediately. Wyriman frowned over his undelivered speech, but after an elaborate bow that thrust his beard at Rand like a spear, he rode north over the hills, followed by Kirill Drapaneos, Bertome, Duresin, and several minor Kyrianan lords, every last one of them stony-faced at a tyrant being placed over them. Gedwin rode by Wyriman's side, almost as if he were the one leading, and got dark scowls for it that he affected not to notice. The other groupings were as mixed. Gregorin also headed north, with a sullen Sunaman trying to pretend he was heading in the same direction by happenstance, and Althanas leading lesser Kyrianan behind. Jordwen Samaris, another of the 9, followed Bashir south, with Amandrid and Gwayam. Those 3 had accepted the Saldaean almost eagerly, for the simple reason that he was not Tyrant or Kyrianan or Ilianer, depending on the man. Rochide seemed to be trying the same with Bashir that Gedwin was with Wyriman, but Bashir appeared to ignore it. A little way from Bashir's party, Torian and Marakan rode with their heads together, likely venting spleen at having Samaradrid placed over them. For that matter, Urshan Natari kept glancing toward Jordwin, and standing in his stirrups to look back toward Gregorin and Kirill, though it was improbable he could see them any longer past the hills. Samaradrid, his back iron rod straight, looked as unflappable as Bashir. It was the same principle Rand had used all along. He trusted Bashir, and he thought he might be able to trust Gregorin, and none of the others could dare think of turning against him, with so many outlanders around him, so many old enemies, and so few friends. Rand laughed softly, watching them all ride off from his hillside. They would fight for him and fight well, because they had no other choice. Any more than he had.
I'm not doing too bad.
Madness, Lews Therin hissed. Rand shoved the voice away angrily. He was hardly alone, of course. Tihera and Margolin had most of the defenders and companions mounted in ranks among the olive trees on hills flanking the one where he sat his horse. The rest were out as a screen against surprise. A company of blue-coated legionmen waited patiently in the hollow below under Mason's eye, and at their rear, as many men in what they had worn surrendering on the heath back in Ilion. They were trying to emulate the legionmen's calm, the other legionmen now, trying without a great deal of success. Rand glanced at Ailil and Aniala. The Tyran woman gave him a simpering smile, but it faltered weakly. The Karianan woman's face was frost. He could not forget them, or Denharid and their armsmen. His column in the center would be the largest and the strongest by a fair margin. A very fair margin. Flynn and the men Rand had chosen out from Dumai's Wells rode up the hill toward him. The balding old man always led, though all save Adley and Narishma now wore the dragon as well as the sword, and Dashiva had worn it first. In part, it was because the younger men deferred to Flynn, with his long experience as a bannerman in the Andaran Queen's Guards. In part, it was because Dashiva did not seem to care. He only appeared amused by the others. When he could spare time from talking to himself, it was. Most often, he hardly seemed aware of anything past his own nose. For that reason, it was something of a shock when Dashiva awkwardly booted his slab-sided mount ahead of the rest. That plain face, so often vague or bemused with the fellow's own thoughts, was fixed in a worried frown. It was more than something of a shock when he seized Saidin as soon as he reached Rand and wove a barrier around them against eavesdropping. Lews Therin did not waste breath, if a disembodied voice had breath, on mutters about killing. He lurched for the source, snarling wordlessly, tried to claw the power away from Rand, and just as abruptly fell silent and vanished. "There's something askew with Saidin here, something amiss," Dashiva said, sounding not at all vague. In fact, he sounded precise and testy. A teacher lecturing a particularly dense pupil. He even stabbed a finger at Rand. "I don't know what it is. Nothing can twist Saidin, and if it could be twisted, we'd have felt it back in the mountains. Well, there was something there yesterday, but so small. I feel it clearly here, though. Saidin is eager. I know Saidin is not alive, but it pulses here. It is difficult to control." Rand forced his hand to loosen its grip on the dragon scepter. He'd always been sure Dashiva was nearly as mad as Lews Therin himself. Usually the man maintained a better hold on himself, though, however precariously. "I've been channeling longer than you, Dashiva. You're just feeling the taint more." He could not soften his tone. Light, he could not go mad yet, and neither could they. "Get to your place. We'll be moving soon." The scouts had to return soon. Even in this flatter country, even limited to no further than they could see, 10 miles would not take long to cover traveling. Dashiva made no move to obey. Instead, he opened his mouth angrily, then snapped it shut. Shaking visibly, he drew a deep breath. "I am well aware how long you have channeled," he said in an icy, almost contemptuous voice. "But surely even you can feel it." "Feel, man! I don't like strange," applied to Saidin, "and I don't want to die or be burned out because you're blind.
I appreciate it.
Look at my ward. Look at it." Rand stared. Dashiva pushing himself forward was peculiar enough, but Dashiva in a temper? And then he did look at the ward. Really look. The flows should have been as steady as the threads in tight-woven canvas. They vibrated. The ward stood solid as it should be, but the individual threads of the power shimmered with faint movement. Moore had said Saidin was strange near Abu Dar, and for 100 miles around. They were closer than 100 miles now. Rand made himself feel Saidin. He was always aware of the power. Anything else meant death or worse. Yet he had become used to the struggle. He fought for life, but the fight had become as natural as life. The struggle was life. He made himself feel that battle, his life. Cold to make stone shatter into dust, fire to make stone flash to vapor, filth to make a rotten cesspit smell a garden in full flower, and a pulsing, like something quivering in his fist. This was not the sort of throbbing he had felt in Shadar Logoth, when the taint of Saidin had resonated with the evil of that place, and Saidin had pulsed with it. The vileness was strong but steady here. It was Saidin itself that seemed full of currents and surges. Eager, Dashiva called it, and Rand could see why. Down the slope, Behind Flynn, Moore scrubbed a hand through his hair and looked around uneasily.
Let's roll one up now.
Flynn alternated shifting on his saddle and easing his sword in its scabbard. Narishma, watching the sky for flying creatures, blinked too often. A muscle twitched in Adley's cheek. Every one of them displayed some sign of nervousness, and little wonder. Relief welled up in Rand. Not madness after all. Dashiva smiled, a twisted, self-satisfied smile. I cannot believe you didn't notice before. There was very close to a sneer in his voice. You've been holding Saidin practically day and night since we began this mad expedition. This is a simple ward, but it did not want to form. Then it snapped together like pulling out of my hands. The silver-blue slash of a gateway rotated open atop one of the bare hills, half a mile to the west, and a soldier pulled his horse through and mounted hurriedly, returning from the scout. Even at a distance, Rand could make out the faint shimmer of the weaves surrounding the gateway before they vanished. The rider had not reached the bottom of the hill before another gateway opened on the crest, and then a third, a fourth, more, one after another, almost as fast as the preceding man could get out of the way. But it did form, Rand said. So had the scouts' gateways. If Saidin is hard to control, it's always hard. And it still does what you want. But why more difficult here? A question for another time. Light, he wished Herodfell were still alive. The old philosopher might have had an answer. Get back with the others, Dashiva, he ordered, but the man stared at him in astonishment, and he had to repeat himself before the fellow let the ward vanish, jerked his horse around without a salute, and thumped the animal back down the slope with his heels. Some trouble, my lord dragon? Anyala simpered. Ailill merely looked at Rand with flat eyes. Seeing the first scout on the way toward Rand, the others fanned off to north and south, where they would join one of the other columns. Finding them the old-fashioned way would be faster than casting about with gateways. Drawing rein in front of Rand, Nalam slapped fist to chest. Did he look a bit wild-eyed? No matter. Saidin still did what the man wielding it made it do. Nalam saluted and gave his report. The Shonchan were not encamped 10 miles away. They were no more than 5 or 6 distant, marching east. And they had Suldam and Damani by the score. Rand issued his orders as Nalam galloped away, and his column began moving west. The defenders and the companions rode on either flank. The Legion men marched at the rear, just behind Enharid. A reminder to the noblewomen and their armsmen if they needed one. Anyala certainly looked over her shoulder often enough, and Ailill's refusal to was pointed. Rand formed the main thrust of the column, Rand and Flynn and the others, just as it would be with the other columns. Ashaman to strike, and men with steel to guard their backs while they killed. The sun still had a long way to climb before midday. Nothing had changed to alter the plan. Madness waits for some, Luce Theron whispered. It creeps up on others. Mirage rode near the head of his army, marching east along a muddy road that wound through hilly olive groves and patchy forest. Not at the head. A full regiment, most Shonchan, rode between him and the forward scouts. He had known generals who wanted to be at the very front. Most were dead. Most had lost the battles they died in. Mud kept down dust, yet word of an army on the move ran like wildfire on the Salas plains, whatever the land. Here and there among the olive trees, he spotted an overturned wheelbarrow or an abandoned pruning hook, but the workers had vanished long since. Luckily, they would avoid his opponents as much as they did him. With luck, lacking Rakan, his opponents would not know he was on them until it was too late. Mirage did not like trusting to luck. Aside from under-officers ready to produce maps or copy orders, and messengers ready to carry them, he rode accompanied only by Abildar Yulan, small enough to make his quite ordinary brown gelding seem immense, a fiery man with the nails of his little fingers painted green, who wore a black wig to conceal his baldness, and Lassane Jarath, a gray-haired woman from Shandar itself, whose pale plump face and blue eyes were a study in serenity. Yulan was not calm. Mirage's cold, dark captain of the air often wore a scowl for the rules that seldom let him touch the reins of a Rakan anymore, But today his frown went bone deep. The sky was clear. Perfect weather for Rakan, but by Suroth's command, none of his flyers would be in the saddle today. Not here. There were too few Rakan with the Hylian to risk them unnecessarily. Lassane's calm troubled Mirage more. More than the senior Der Suldam under his command, she was a friend with whom he had shared many a cup of kaf and many a game of stones. An animated woman, always bubbling over with enthusiasms and amusement. And she was icy calm, as silent as any Suldam he had tried to question. Within his sight were 20 Damani flanking the horsemen, each walking beside her Suldam's mount. The Suldam bobbed in their saddles, bending to pat a Damani's head, straightening only to bend again to stroke her hair. The Damani looked steady enough to his eye, but plainly the Suldam were on razor's edge. And ebullient Lassane rode silent as a stone. A Torm appeared ahead, racing down the column. Well off to the side, on the edge of the groves, yet horses wickered and shied as the bronze-scaled creature flowed past. A trained Torm would not attack horses, at least not unless the killing frenzy overtook it. The reason Torm were no good in battle, but horses trained to become around Torm were in as short supply as Torm themselves. Mirage sent a skinny underlieutenant named Varek to fetch the Morat Torm's scouting report. Afoot, and the light consumed whether Varek lost sight there. He would not waste time on Varek trying to control a mount acquired locally. The man returned faster than he went, and made a crisp bow, beginning his report before his back was straight again. "The enemy is less than 5 miles to east, my Lord Captain General, marching in our direction. They are deployed in 5 columns, spaced approximately 1 mile apart." So much for luck. But Mirage had considered how he would attack 40,000 with only 5 himself, and 50 Damani. Quickly, men were galloping with others to deploy to meet an attempted envelopment, and the regiments behind him began turning into the groves, Suldam riding among them with their Damani. Gathering his cloak against a sudden cold wind, Mirage noticed something that made him feel colder still. Lassane was watching the Suldam vanish into the trees too, and she had begun to sweat. Bertome rode easily, letting the wind stream his cloak to one side, but he studied the forested country ahead with a wariness he barely attempted to conceal. Of his 4 countrymen at his back, only Doresin was truly skilled in the game of houses. That fool tyrant dog Wireman was blind, of course. Bertome glared at the puffed-up buffoon's back. Wireman rode well ahead of the rest in deep conversation with Gedwin, and if Bertome needed any further proof that the tyrant would smile at what gagged a goat, it was how he tolerated that hot-eyed young monster. He noticed Kirill glancing sideways at him and reined his gray further from the towering man. He had no particular enmity toward the Ilianer, but he did hate people looming over him. He could not wait to return to Cairhien, where he did not have to be surrounded by ungainly giants. Kirill Drapaneus was not blind, though, however overtall. He had sent a dozen scouts forward, too. Wireman had sent 1. "Doresin," Bertome said softly. Then a little louder, "Doresin, you lump!" The bony man gave a start in his saddle. Like Bertome, like the other 3, he had shaved and powdered the front of his head. The style of marking yourself like a soldier had become quite fashionable. Doresin should have called him a toad in return, the way they had since boyhood, but instead he heeled his gelding up beside Bertome's and leaned close. He was worried and letting it show, his forehead furrowed deeply. "You realize the Lord Dragon means us to die," he whispered, glancing at the column trailing behind them. "Blood and fire, I only listened to Colaver, but I have known I was a dead man since he killed her." For a moment, Bertome eyed the column of armsmen, snaking back through the rolling hills. The trees were more scattered here than ahead, but still enough to shield an attack until it was right on top of you. The last olive grove nearly a mile behind. Wireman's men rode at the fore, of course, in those ridiculous coats with their fat white-striped sleeves, and then Kirill's Ilianers in enough green and red to shame tinkers. His own people, decently clad in dark blue beneath their breastplates, were still beyond his sight, with Doresins and the others, ahead only of the company of legionmen. Wireman had seemed surprised that the foot kept up, though he had hardly set a difficult pace. It was not really the armsmen Bertram glanced at, though. 7 men rode before even Wyramans, 7 men with hard faces and death-cold eyes in black coats. One wore a pin in the shape of a silver sword on his tall collar. An elaborate way to go about it, he told Doresson dryly, and I doubt Althor would have sent those fellows with us if we were just being fed into a sausage grinder. Forehead still creased, Doresson opened his mouth again, but Bertram said, I need to talk to the Tyrant. He disliked seeing his childhood friend this way. Althor had unhinged him. Absorbed in one another, Wyraman and Gedwin did not hear him riding up on them. Gedwin was idly playing with his reins, his features cold with contempt. The Tyrant was red-faced. I don't care who you are, he was saying to the black-coated man in a low, hard voice, spittle flying. I won't take more risk without a command direct from the lips of... Abruptly, the pair became aware of Bertram, and Wyraman's mouth snapped shut. He glared as if he wanted to kill Bertram. The Ashaman's ever-present smile melted away. The wind gusted, cold and sharp, as clouds drifted across the sun, but no colder than Gedwin's sudden stare. With a small shock, Bertram realized the man also wanted to strike him dead on the spot. Gedwin's icily murderous gaze did not change, but Wyraman's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The red faded slowly as he produced a smile in an instant, an oily smile with only a trace of mocking condescension. I've been thinking about you, Bertram, he said heartily. A pity Althor strangled your cousin. With his own hands, I hear. Frankly, I was surprised you came when he called. I've seen him watching you. I fear he plans something more interesting for you than thrashing your heels on the floor while his fingers tighten on your throat. Bertram suppressed a sigh, and not only at the fool's clumsiness. A good many thought to manipulate him with Colaver's death. She had been his favored cousin, but ambitious beyond reason. Saigon had good claims to the Sun Throne, yet she could not have held it against the strength of Ryoton or Damodred, either one, let alone both together. Not without the open blessings of the White Tower or the Dragon Reborn. Still, she had been his favorite. What did Wyraman want? Certainly not what it seemed on the surface. Even this tyrant oaf was not that simple. Before he could frame any response, a horseman came galloping toward them through the trees ahead. A Kyrienan. And as he reined to a sudden halt in front of them, that made his horse sit back on its haunches, Bertram recognized one of his own armsmen, a gap-toothed fellow with seamed scars on both cheeks. Doyle, he thought, from the Colchain estates. My Lord Bertram, the fellow panted, bowing hastily. There are 2,000 Terrabonners hard on my heels, and women with them, with lightning on their dresses. Hard on his heels, Wyraman murmured disparagingly. We'll see what my man has to say when he gets back. I certainly don't see any... Sudden whoops in the near distance ahead cut him off, and the thunder of hooves, and then quickly galloping lancers appeared, a flowing tide spreading through the trees, straight toward Bertram and the others. Wyraman laughed. Kill whoever you wish, whenever you wish, Gedwin, he said, drawing sword with a flourish. I use the methods I use, and that's that. Racing back toward his armsman, he waved the blade over his head, shouting, Santiago! Santiago and glory! It was no surprise he did not add a shout for his country to those for his house and his greatest love. Spurring in the same direction, Bertram raised his own voice. Saigon and Kyrian! No need for sword-waving yet. Saigon and Kyrian! What had the man been after? Thunder rumbled, and Bertram looked to the sky, perplexed. There were a few more clouds than earlier. No. Doyle, Dalin, had mentioned those women. And then he forgot all about whatever the fool tyrant wanted, as steel-veiled Terrabonners poured over the wooded hills toward him, the earth blooming fire and the sky raining lightning ahead of them. Saigon and Kyrian! He shouted. The wind rose. Horsemen clashed amid thick trees and heavy underbrush, where shadows hung heavily. The light seemed to be failing, the clouds thickening overhead, but it was hard to say with the dense forest canopy for a roof. Booming roars half drowned the ring of steel on steel, the shouts of men, the screams of horses. Sometimes the ground shook. Sometimes the enemy raised shouts. Den Lucianos! Den Lucianos and the bees! Annalyn! Rally to Annalyn! Hailin! Hailin! For the High Lord Sunaman! The last was the only cry Varric understood in the least, though he suspected any of the locals who named themselves High Lords or Ladies might not be offered the chance to swear the oath. He jerked his sword free from where he had jammed it into his opponent's armpit, just above the breastplate, and let the pale little man topple. A dangerous fighter until he made the mistake of raising his blade too high. The man's bay crashed off through the undergrowth, and Varric spared a moment for regret. The animal looked better than the white-footed dun he was forced to ride. A moment only, and then he was peering through the close-set trees, where it seemed vines dangled from half the branches and bunches of some gray, feathery plant from nearly all. Sounds of battle rose from every direction, but at first he could see nothing that moved. Then a dozen Altaran lances appeared at 50 paces, walking their horses and peering about carefully, though the way they talked loudly among themselves more than justified the red slashes crisscrossing their breastplates. Varric gathered his reins, meaning to take them in. An escort, even this undisciplined rabble, might be the difference between the urgent message he carried reaching Banner General Chiang Mai and not. Black streaks flashed from among the trees, emptying Altaran saddles. Their horses dashed in every direction as the riders fell, and then there were only a dozen corpses sprawled on the damp carpet of dead leaves, at least one crossbow bolt jutting from every man. Nothing moved. Varric shivered in spite of himself. Those foot in blue coats had seemed easy at first, with no pikes to stand behind, but they never came into the open, hiding behind trees, in dips in the ground. They were not the worst. He had been sure after the frantic retreat to the ships at Falma that he had seen the worst he ever could see, the ever-victorious army in a rout. Not half an hour gone, though, he had seen 100 Taraboners face one lone man in a black coat. 100 lancers against one. The Taraboners had been ripped to shreds. Literally ripped to shreds. Men and horses simply exploding as fast as he could count. The slaughter had continued after the Taraboners turned to flee, went on so long as one of them remained in sight. Perhaps it was really no worse than having the ground erupt beneath your feet, but at least Imani usually left enough of you to be buried. He had been told by the last man he managed to speak to in these woods, a grizzled veteran from home, leading 100 Amadisian pikes, that Chiang Mai was in this direction. Ahead, he spotted riderless horses tied to trees and men afoot. Maybe they could give him further direction, and he would give them the lash of his tongue for standing about while a battle raged. When he rode in among them, he forgot tongue lashings. He had found what he was looking for, but not at all what he wanted to find. A dozen badly burned corpses lay in a row. One, his honey-brown face untouched, was recognizably Chiang Mai. The men on their feet were all Taraboners, Amadisians, Altarans. Some of them were injured too. The only Shonchan was a tight-faced Suldam, soothing a weeping Damani. "What happened here?" Varric demanded. He did not think it was like these Ashaman to leave survivors. Maybe the Suldam had fought him off. "Madness, my lord." A hulking Taraboner shrugged away the man who was spreading ointment down his seared left arm. The sleeve appeared to have been burned away clear to the fellow's breastplate, yet despite his burns, he did not grimace. His veil of steel mail hung by a corner from his red-plumed conical helmet, bearing a hard face, with thick gray mustaches that nearly hid his mouth, and his eyes were insultingly direct. "A group of Ilianers. They fell on us without warning. At first, all went well. They had none of the blackcoats with them. Lord Chiang Mai, he led us bravely. And the woman channeled lightnings. Then, just as the Ilianers broke the lightnings, they fell among us, too." He cut off with a significant look at the Suldam. She was on her feet in an instant, shaking her free fist and striding as far toward the Tarabonner as the leash attached to her other wrist would allow. Her Damani lay in a weeping heap. "I will not hear this dog's words against my Zakai. She is a good Damani. A good Damani." Varric made soothing gestures to the woman. He had seen Suldam make their charges howl for misdeeds, and a few who crippled the recalcitrant, but most would bristle even at one of the blood who cast aspersions on a favorite. This Tarabonner was not of the blood, and by the look of the quivering Suldam, she was ready to do murder. Had the man voiced his ridiculous unspoken charge, Varric thought she might have killed him on the spot. "Prayers for the dead must wait," Varric said bluntly. What he was about to do would end with him in the hands of the Seekers if he failed, but there was not a Shonchan left standing here except the Suldam. "I am assuming command. We will disengage and turn south." "Disengage?" the heavy-shouldered Tarabonner barked. "It will take us days to disengage. The Ilianers, they fight like badgers backed into a corner. The Karianen like ferrets in a box. The Tyrans, they're not so hard as I have heard, but there are maybe a dozen of these Ashaman, yes? I do not even know where 3/4 of my men are in this jolly bag." Emboldened by his example, the others began giving protest too. Varric ignored them, and forbore asking what a jolly bag was. Looking at the tangled forest all around him, listening to the clash of battle, the booms of explosions and lightnings, he could imagine. "You will gather your men and begin pulling back," he said loudly, cutting through their chatter. "Not too fast. You will act in unison." Mirage's orders to Chiang Mai said with all possible speed. He had memorized them in case something happened to the copy in his saddlebags. All possible speed, but too much speed in this, and half the men would be left behind, chopped to flinders at the enemy's leisure. "Now move! You'll fight for the Empress. May she live forever." That last was the sort of thing you told fresh recruits, but for some reason the listening men jerked as if he had struck them all with his quirt. Bowing quickly and deeply, hands on knees, they all but flew to their horses. Strange. Now it was up to him to find the Shonchan units. One of those would be commanded by someone above him, and he could pass his responsibility. The Suldam was on her knees, stroking her still weeping Damani's hair, and crooning softly. "Get her soothed down," he told her, with all possible speed. And he thought he had seen a touch of anxiety in Mirage's eyes. What could make Kenna Mirage anxious? "I think we will be depending on you, Suldam, to the south." Now, why would that make the blood drain from her face? Bashir stood just inside the edge of the trees, frowning through his helmet's face bars at what he saw. His bay nuzzled his shoulder. He held his cloak close against the wind, more to avoid any motion that would draw eyes than for the cold, though that chilled his flesh. It would have been a spring breeze back in Saldaia, but months in the Southlands had softened him. Shining bright between gray clouds that sailed along quickly, the sun still lay a little short of midday, and ahead of him. Just because you began a battle facing west did not mean you ended it that way. Before him lay a broad pasture where flocks of black and white goats cropped at the brown grass in desultory fashion, just as if there was no battle raging all around them. Not that there was any sign of it here, for the moment. A man could get himself cut to doll rags crossing that meadow. And in the trees, whether forest or olive groves or thickets, you did not always see the enemy before you were on top of him, scouts or no scouts. "If we're going to cross," Guayam muttered, rubbing a wide hand over his bald head, "we should cross. Light's truth, we're wasting time." Amandred snapped his mouth shut. Likely the moon-faced Karianen had been about to say much the same thing. He would agree with a Tyran when horses climbed trees. Jordwin Samaris snorted. The man should have grown a beard to hide that narrow jaw. It made his head look like a forester's splitting wedge. "I do say go around," he muttered. "I've lost enough men to those light-cursed Damani, and—" He trailed off with an uneasy glance toward Rochide. The young Ashaman stood by himself, mouth tight, fingering that dragon pin on his collar. Maybe wondering whether it was worth it, by the look of him. There was no knowing air about the boy now, only frowning worry. Leading quick by the reins, Bashir strode to the Ashaman and drew him farther aside in the trees. Pushed him farther aside. Rochide scowled, going reluctantly. The man was tall enough to loom over Bashir, but Bashir was having none of it. Can I count on your people next time? Bashir demanded, jerking a mustache in irritation. No delays. Rothschild and his fellows seemed to have grown slower and slower, responding when they found themselves opposite Damani. I know what I'm about, Bashir, Rothschild snarled. Aren't we killing enough of them for you? As far as I can see, we're about done. Bashir nodded slowly, not in agreement with the last. There were plenty of enemy soldiers left, almost anywhere you looked hard enough. But a good many were dead. He had patterned his movements on what he had studied of the Trolloc Wars, when the forces of the light seldom came anywhere near the numbers they had to face. Slash at the flanks and run. Slash at the rear and run. Slash and run. And when the enemy chased after, turn on the ground you had chosen beforehand, where the legionmen lay waiting with their crossbows, turn and cut at him until it was time to run again, or until he broke. Already today he had broken Tarabanners, Amadisians, Altarans, and these Shonchan in their strange armor. He had seen more enemy dead than in any fight since the Blood Snow. But if he had Ashaman, the other side had those Damani. A good third of his Saldaeans lay dead along the miles behind. Nearly half his force was dead, all told, and there were still more Shonchan out there, with their cursed women, and Tarabanners, and Amadisians, and Altarans. They just kept coming, more appearing as soon as he finished the last. And the Ashaman were growing hesitant. Swinging into Quick's saddle, he rode back to Jordwin and the others. We go around, he ordered, ignoring Jordwin's nods as much as he did Guayam and Amandred's scowls. Triple scouts ahead. I mean to push hard, but I don't want to trip over a Damani. No one laughed. Rothschild had gathered the other 5 Ashaman around him, one with a silver sword pinned to his collar, the others without. There had been 2 more with bare collars when they started out that morning, but if Ashaman knew how to kill, so did Damani. Waving his arms angrily, Rothschild appeared to be arguing with them. His face was red, theirs blank and stubborn. Bashir just hoped Rothschild could keep all of them from deserting. Today had been costly enough without adding that sort of man wandering about loose. A light rain fell. Rand scowled at the thick black clouds gathering the sky, already beginning to obscure a pale sun halfway down to the far horizon. Light rain now, but it would thicken like those clouds. Irritably, he returned to studying the land ahead of him. The crown of swords pricked his temples. With the power in him, the land was clear as a map despite the weather. Clear enough, anyway. Hills sinking away, some covered with thickets or olive trees, others bare grass or just stone and weeds. He thought he saw movement at the edge of a copse, then again among the rows of an olive orchard on another hill a mile from the copse. Thinking was not enough. Dead men lay across the miles behind, dead enemies. Dead women, too, he knew. But he had stayed away from anywhere Suldam and Damani had died, refused to see their faces. Most thought it was hatred for those who killed so many of his followers. Tidai frisked a few steps on the hilltop before Rand settled him with a firm hand and the pressure of his knees. A fine thing if a Suldam spotted his movement. The few trees around him were not enough to hide much. Vaguely he realized he did not recognize a one of them. Tidai tossed his head. Rand tucked the dragon scepter into his saddlebags, just the carved butt end sticking out, to free both hands in case the gelding was not satisfied. He could have taken weariness from the horse with Saidin, but he knew no way to make it obey with the power. He could not see how the gelding retained enough energy. Saidin filled him, bubbled in him, but his distantly felt body wanted to sag with weariness. Part of that was the sheer amount of the power he had handled today. Part was the strain of fighting Saidin to make it do what he wanted. Always Saidin had to be conquered, forced, but never before like today. The half-healed, never-healing wounds in his left side were agony. The older, an auger trying to drill through the void. The newer, a blaze of raw flame. "It was an accident, my Lord Dragon," Adley said suddenly. "I swear it was." "Shut up and watch," Rand told him harshly. Adley's eyes sank to his hands on his own reins for a moment, Then he raked damp hair out of his face and jerked his head up obediently. Today, here, controlling Sayadine was harder than ever, but letting it slip anytime, anywhere, could kill you. Adley had let it slip, and men had died in uncontrolled bursts of fire. Not just the Amadisians he had been aiming at, but near 30 of Ailil's armsmen, and almost as many of Anayula's. Except for his slip, Adley would have been with more, with the companions in the woods half a mile to the south. Narishma and Hopwell were with the defenders to the north.
This one is,
Rand wanted Adley under his eye.
it's just called sour.
Had any other accidents happened out of his sight? He could not watch everyone all the time. Flynn's face was grim as day-old death, and Deshiva, far from looking vague, seemed on the point of sweating with concentration. He still muttered to himself under his breath, so low Rand could not hear even with the power in him. But the man mopped rain from his face continually with a sodden lace-edged linen handkerchief that had grown more than grimy as the day wore on. Rand did not think they had slipped. In any case, neither they nor Adley held the power now, nor would until he instructed them to seize it. "Is it done?" Anayula asked behind him. Heedless of who might be watching out there, Rand wheeled Tie-Dye Shah around to face her. The Tyran woman started back in her saddle, the hood of her richly elaborate rain cape falling to her shoulders. Her cheek gave a twitch. Her eyes might have been full of fear or hate. At her side, Ailil fingered her reins calmly with red-gloved hands. "What more can you want?" the smaller woman asked in a cool voice. A lady being polite to a menial. Barely. If the size of a victory is accounted by dead enemies, I think today alone will put your name in the histories. "I mean to drive the Shan-Chan into the sea," Rand snapped. Light, he had to finish them now, when he had the chance. He could not fight the Shan-Chan and the Forsaken, and the Light alone knew who or what else, all at the same time. "I did it before, and I will again." "Do you have the Horn of Balir hidden in your pocket this time?" Luz Theron asked slyly. Rand snarled at him silently. "There's someone below," Flynn said suddenly. "Riding up this way. From the west." Rand pulled his mount back around. Legion men ringed the slopes of the hill, though they hid well enough that he seldom caught sight of a blue coat. None of them had a horse. Who would be riding? Bashir's bay trotted up the slope, almost as though it were level ground. Bashir's helmet hung from his saddle, and the man himself looked tired. Without preamble, he spoke in a flat voice. "We're finished here. Part of fighting is knowing when to go, and it's time. I've left 500 dead behind, near enough, and 2 of your soldiers for salt. I sent 3 more to find Samaradrid, Gregorin, and Wyraman and tell them to rally on you. I doubt they're in any better condition than I am. How does your butcher's bill run?" Rand ignored the question. His own dead topped Bashir's by close to 200. "You had no right sending orders to the others. So long as there are half a dozen Ashaman left, so long as there's me, I have enough. I mean to find the rest of the Shan-Chan army and destroy it, Bashir. I won't let them add Altara to Terraban and Amadisia." Bashir knuckled his thick mustaches with a wry laugh. "You want to find them? Look out there." He swept a gauntleted hand across the hills to the west. "I can't point to a particular spot, but there are 10, maybe 15,000 close enough to see from here, if those trees weren't in the way. I danced with the Dark One getting through them unseen to reach you. Maybe 100 Damani down there, maybe more. More coming for sure, and more men. Seems their general has decided to concentrate on you. I suppose it isn't always cheese and ale being Taviran."
That was a rough one there.
"If they're out there,"
Taking a
Rand scanned the hills. The rain fell more heavily. Where had he seen movement? Light, he was tired. Sayadine hammered at him. Unconsciously, he touched the wrapped bundle beneath his stirrup leather. His hand jerked away of its own accord. 10,000, even 15. Once Samaradrid reached him, and Gregorin and Wyraman. More important, once the rest of the Ashaman did. "If they're out there, that's where I'll destroy them. I'll hit them from all sides, the way we intended in the first place." Frowning, Bashir reined his horse closer until his knee almost touched Rand's. Flynn moved his mount away, but Adley was too focused on staring through the rain to notice anything so near, and Deshiva, still wiping his face incessantly, stared with open interest. Bashir lowered his voice to a murmur. "You aren't thinking straight. That was a good plan in the beginning, but their general thinks fast. He spread out to blunt our attacks before we could fall on him spread out marching. We've cost him even so, it seems, and he's now pulling everything together. You won't catch him by surprise. He wants us to come at him. He's out there waiting for it. Ashaman or no Ashaman, if we stand nose to nose with this fellow, I think maybe the vultures grow fat and nobody rides away." "Nobody stands nose to nose with the Dragon Reborn," Rand growled. "The Forsaken could tell him that, whoever he is. Right, Flynn? Deshiva?" Flynn nodded uncertainly. Deshiva flinched. "You think I can't surprise him, Bashir? Watch!" Pulling the long bundle loose, he stripped away the cloth covering, and Rand heard gasps as raindrops glistened on a sword seemingly made of crystal. The sword that is not a sword. "Let's see if he's surprised by Kalendor in the hands of the Dragon Reborn, Bashir." Cradling the translucent blade in the crook of his elbow, Rand rode Tidashar forward a few steps. There was no reason to. He had no clearer view from there, except something spidered across the outer surface of the void, a wriggling black web. He was afraid. The last time he had used Kalendor, really used it, he had tried to bring the dead back to life. He had been sure he could do anything then, anything at all, like a madman thinking he could fly. But he was the Dragon Reborn. He could do anything. Had he not proved it time and again? He reached for the source through the sword that is not a sword. Sayadin seemed to leap into Kalendor before he touched the source through it. From pommel to point, the crystal sword shone with a white light. He'd only thought the power filled him before. Now he held more than 10 men could have unaided. 100. He did not know how many. The fires of the sun searing through his head, the cold of all the winters of all the ages eating into his heart. In that torrent, the taint was all the midden heaps in the world emptying into his soul. Sayadin still tried to kill him, tried to scour away, burn away, freeze away every scrap of him. But he fought, and he lived for a moment more, and another moment, another. He wanted to laugh. He could do anything. Once, holding Kalendor, he had made a weapon that searched out Shadowspawn through the Stone of Tyr, struck them dead with hunting lightning wherever they stood or ran or hid. Surely there must be something like that to use against his enemies here. But when he called to Luz Theron, only anguished whimpers answered, as if that disembodied voice feared the pain of Sayadin. With Kalendor blazing in his hand, he did not remember raising the blade overhead. He stared at the hills where his enemies hid. They were gray now, with thickening rain, and dense black clouds blocking the sun. What was it he had told Egan Padros? "I am the storm," he whispered, a shout in his ears, a roar. And he channeled. Overhead, the clouds boiled. Where they had been the black of soot, they became midnight, the heart of midnight. He did not know what he was channeling. So often he did not, in spite of Asmodean's teaching. Maybe Luz Theron was guiding him, in spite of the man's weeping. Flows of Sayadin spun across the sky, wind and water and fire. Fire. The sky truly did rain lightning. 100 bolts at once. Hundreds. Forked blue-white shafts, stabbing down as far as he could see. The hills before him erupted. Some flew apart under the torrent of lightning like thick anthills. Flames sprang up in thickets, trees turning to torches in the rain, flames racing through olive orchards. Something struck him hard, and he realized he was picking himself up from the ground. The crown had fallen from his head. Kalendor still blazed in his hand, though. Vaguely he was aware of Tidashar scrambling to his feet, trembling. So they thought to strike back at him, did they? Shoving Kalendor high, he screamed at them,
Come against me if you dare. I am the storm. Come if you dare, Shaitan. I am the dragon reborn.
1,000 sizzling lightning bolts hailed down from the clouds. Again, something struck him down. He tried to fight up again. Kalendor, still shining, lay a pace from his outstretched hand. The sky shattered with lightnings. Suddenly he realized that the way to top him was Bashir, that the man was shaking him. It must have been Bashir who had flung him down.
Stop it!
The Saldaean shouted. Blood fanned down his face from a split across his scalp.
You're killing us, man! Stop!
Rand turned his head, and one stunned look was enough. Lightnings flashed all around him, in every direction. A bolt stabbed down onto the reverse slope, where Denharad and the armsmen were. The screams of men and horses rose. Anayala and Ailil were both afoot, trying vainly to quiet mounts that reared, eyes rolling, trying to rip reins free. Flynn was bending over someone, not far from a dead horse with legs already stiff.
Excuse me.
Rand let Saladin go. He let it go, but for moments it still flowed into him, and lightning raged. The flow into him dwindled, tailed off, and vanished. Dizziness swept through him in its place. For 3 more heartbeats, 2 of Kalendor shone where they lay on the ground, and lightning fell. Then, silence except for the rising drum of the rain, and the screams from behind the hill. Slowly Bashir climbed off of him, and Rand rose, unaided on his tottering legs, blinking as his sight returned to normal. The Saldaean watched him, as he might have a rabid lion, fingering his sword hilt. Anayala took one look at Rand on his feet, and collapsed in a faint. Her horse dashed away, reins dangling. Ailil, still fighting a rearing animal, spared few glances for Rand. Rand let Kalendar lie where it was for the moment. He was not sure he dared pick it up. Not yet. Flynn straightened, shaking his head, then stood silently as Rand went unsteadily to stand beside him. The rain fell on Jonan Adley's sightless eyes, bulging as if in horror. Jonan had been one of the first. Those screams from behind the hill seemed to slice through the rain. How many more, Rand wondered. Among the defenders, the companions, among... Rain thick as a blanket hid the hills where the Shanshan army lay. Had he hurt them at all, striking out blindly? Or were they still waiting out there with all their demoni, waiting to see how many more of his own he could kill for them? Set whatever guard you think we need, Rand told Bashir. His voice was iron. One of the first. His heart was iron. When Gregorin and the others reach us, we'll travel to where the carts are waiting as fast as we can. Bashir nodded without speaking and turned away in the rain. I've lost, Rand thought dully. I'm the dragon reborn. But for the first time, I've lost. Suddenly, Luz Theron raged up inside him, sly digs forgotten. I've never been defeated, he snarled. I am the Lord of the Morning. No one can defeat me. Rand sat in the rain, turning the crown of swords in his hands, looking at Kalendor lying in the mud. He let Luz Theron rage. Abildar Yulan wept, grateful for the downpour that hid the tears on his cheeks. Someone would have to give the order. Eventually, someone would have to apologize to the Empress. Might she live forever, and maybe to Suroth sooner. Those were not why he wept, though, nor even for a dead comrade. Roughly ripping a sleeve from his coat, he laid it across Mirage's staring eyes, so the rain would not fall on them. Send out orders for retreat, Yulan ordered, and saw the men standing around him jerk. For the second time on these shores, the ever-victorious army had suffered a devastating defeat, and Yulan did not think he was the only one who wept.
Chapter 25. An Unwelcome Return. Seated behind her gilded writing table, Elida fingered an age-dark ivory carving of a strange bird with a beak as long as its body, and listened with some amusement to the 6 women standing on the other side of the table. Each a sitter for her Ajah, they frowned sideways at one another, shifted velvet slippers on the brightly patterned carpet that covered most of the russet floor tiles, twitched at vine-worked shawls so the colored fringes danced, and generally looked and sounded like a gaggle of peevish serving girls wishing they had the nerve to go for each other's throats in front of their mistress. Frost coated the glassed casements fitted into the windows so that it was hardly possible to see the snow swirling outside, though sometimes the winds howled with an icy rage. Elida felt quite warm, and not just for the thick logs blazing in the white marble fireplace. Whether these women knew it or not, well, Duhara knew, certainly, and perhaps the others did, she was their mistress. The elaborate gold-covered case clock that Samaila had commissioned ticked away. Samaila's vanished dream would come true. The tower returned to its glory, and firmly in the capable hands of Elida do Avrinia Royhan. No Terangrial has ever been found that can control a woman's channeling, Velina was saying in a voice cool and precise, but almost girlishly high-pitched. A voice at strong odds with her eagle's beak of a nose and her sharp, tilted eyes. She sat for the white, and was the very model of a white sister, in all but her fierce appearance. Her plain, snowy dress seemed stark and cold. Very few have ever been found that perform the same function. Therefore, logically, if such a Terangrial were found, or more than one, improbable as that must be, there could not be sufficient of them to control more than 2 or 3 women at most. It follows that the reports of these so-called Shanchan are exaggerated wildly. If women on leashes exist, they cannot channel. Plainly not. I do not deny these people hold Ebudar and Amador and perhaps more, but clearly they are but a creation of Randall Thor, perhaps to frighten people into flocking to him, like this prophet of his. It is simple logic. I'm very glad you don't deny Amador and Ebudar, at least, Velina, Siobhan said dryly, and she could be very dry indeed. As tall as most men, and bonily thin with it, the brown sitter had an angular face and a long chin, not improved by a cap of curls. With spidery fingers she rearranged her shawl and smoothed skirts of dark golden silk, and her voice took on pointed amusement. I'm uncomfortable saying what can and can't be. For example, not long gone, everyone knew only a shield woven by a sister could stop a woman channeling. Then comes a simple herb, fork root, and anyone at all can feed you a tea that leaves you unable as a stone to channel for hours. Useful with unruly wilders or the like, I suppose, but a nasty little surprise for those who think they knew everything, eh? Maybe next someone will learn to make Terangrial again. Elida's mouth tightened. She did not concern herself with impossibilities, and if no sister had managed to rediscover the making of Terangrial in 3,000 years, one never would, and that was that. It was knowledge slipping through her fingers when she wanted it held close that curled Elida's tongue. In spite of all her efforts, every last initiate in the tower had learned of forkroot now. No one liked knowing in the least. No one liked suddenly being vulnerable to anyone with a knowledge of herbs and a little hot water. That knowledge was worse than poison, as the sitters here made clear. At mention of the herb, Duhara's big dark eyes grew uneasy in her coppery face, and she held herself more stiffly than usual, hands clutching skirts so red they seemed nearly black. Sedora actually swallowed, and her fingers tightened on the worked leather folder Elida had handed her, though the round-faced yellow usually carried herself with a frosty elegance. Andaya shivered. She actually wrapped her gray-fringed shawl around her convulsively. Elida wondered what they would do if they learned the Ashaman had rediscovered traveling. As it was, they were barely able to make themselves speak of them. At least she had managed to hold that knowledge to a handful. I think we might better concern ourselves with what we know to be true, yes? Andaya said firmly, back in control of herself. Her light brown hair, brushed till it gleamed, hung flowing down her back, and her silver-slashed blue dress was cut in the style of Andor, but Tarabon still rested strongly on her tongue. Though neither particularly small nor particularly slim, she somehow always reminded Elida of a sparrow about to hop on a branch. A most unlikely-appearing negotiator, though her reputation had been earned. She smiled at the others, not very pleasantly, and that seemed sparrow-like too. Perhaps it was how she held her head. Idle speculation, it wastes precious time. The world hangs by a thread, and myself, I do not wish to fritter away valuable hours prattling about supposed logic, or chattering over what every fool and novice knows. Does anyone have anything useful to say? For a sparrow, she could put acid on her words. Velina's face went red, and Siobhan's darkened. Rubinda twisted her lips at the gray. Perhaps they were meant to make a smile, but they merely seemed to writhe. With raven-black hair and eyes like sapphires, the Mayenner usually looked as if she intended to walk through a stone wall, and planting her fists on her hips now, she seemed ready to walk through too. We've dealt with what we can for the time being, Andaya. Most of it, anyway. The rebels are caught by the snows in Murundi, and we'll make winter hot enough for them that in the spring they'll come crawling back to apologize and beg penance. Tyr will be taken care of as soon as we find where the High Lord Darlin has vanished to, and Carian once we root Caroline Dumadred and Toram Rioton out of their hiding places. Althor has the crown of Ilion for the moment, but that's in work. So unless you have a scheme for snaffling the man into the tower or making the so-called Ashaman vanish, I have the business of my Aja to be about. Andaya drew herself up, her feathers well and truly ruffled. For that matter, Duhara's eyes narrowed. Mention of men who could channel always lit fires in her head. Siobhan clicked her tongue as if at children squabbling, though she looked pleased to see it. And Velina frowned, for some reason sure Siobhan had aimed at her. This was amusing, but getting out of hand. The business of the Ajas is important, daughters. Elida did not raise her voice, but every head swiveled toward her. She replaced the ivory carving with the rest of her collection in the large box covered with roses and golden scrolls, carefully adjusted the positions of her writing case and correspondence box so the 3 lacquered boxes lined up just so on the table. And once their silence was perfect, she went on. The business of the tower is more important, though. I trust you will effect my decrees promptly. I see too much sloth in the tower. I fear Sylviana may find herself very busy if matters do not come right soon. She did not voice any further threat. She merely smiled. As you command, mother, murmured 6 voices, not so steady as their owners might have wished. Even Duhara's face was pasty pale as they made their curtsies. 2 sitters had been stripped of their chairs, and half a dozen had served days of labor for penance, which was humiliating enough in their position to be mortification of the spirit besides. Siobhan and Sedora certainly wore tight mouths, as they remembered all too well scrubbing floors and working in the laundries, but none had been sent to Sylviana for mortification of the flesh. No one wanted to be. The mistress of novices had 2 or 3 visits each week from sisters who had been given penance by their Ajas, or set one for themselves. A dose of the strap, however painful, was done with much more quickly than raking garden paths for a month. But Sylviana possessed considerably less mercy with sisters than with the novices and accepted in her charge. More than one sister must have spent the next few days wondering whether a month pulling a rake might not have been preferable after all. They scurried toward the doors, eager to be away. Sitters or no, not one would have set foot this high in the tower without Elida's direct summons. Fingering her striped stole, Elida let her smile become one of pleasure. Yes, she was the mistress in the White Tower, as was only proper for the Amerlin seat. Before that fast-stepping knot of sitters reached the doorway, the left-hand door opened, and Alviarin stepped in, the narrow white stole of the keeper almost vanishing against a silk dress that made Velina's seem dingy. Elida felt her smile go crooked and begin sliding from her face. Alviarin had a single sheet of parchment in one slim hand. Odd, what one noticed at a time like this. The woman had been gone almost 2 weeks, vanished from the tower without word or note, without anyone so much as seeing her go, and Elida had begun to think fond thoughts of Alviarin lying in a snowbank or swept away in a river, sliding beneath the ice. The 6 sitters skidded to a halt uncertainly when Alviarin did not move out of their way. Even a keeper with Alviarin's influence did not impede sitters, though Velina, normally the most self-possessed woman in the tower, flinched for some reason. Alviarin glanced once at Elida, coolly, studied the sitters for a moment, and understood everything. "I think you should leave that with me," she said to Sedora in tones only a fraction warmer than the snow outside. "The mother likes to consider her decrees carefully, as you know. This would not be the first time she changed her mind after signing." She held out a slim hand. Sedora, whose arrogance was notable even among yellows, barely hesitated before giving her the leather folder. Elida ground her teeth in fury. Sedora had hated her 5 days up to her elbows in hot water and scrub boards. Elida would find something less comfortable for her next time. Maybe Sylviana after all. Maybe cleaning the cesspits. Alviarin stepped aside without a word, and the sitters went, adjusting shawls, muttering to themselves, reassuming the dignity of the hall. Briskly, Alviarin closed the door behind them and walked toward Elida, thumbing through the papers in the folder. The decrees she had signed, hoping Alviarin was dead. Of course, she had not rested on hope. She had not spoken to Siain in case someone might see and tell Alviarin when she returned, but Siain was certainly working away as instructed, following the path of treason that surely would lead to Alviarin Friedhelm. But Elida had hoped. Oh, how she had hoped. Alviarin murmured to herself as she rifled the folder. "This can go through, I suppose, but not this, or this, and certainly not this." She crumpled a decree signed and sealed by the Amerlin seat and tossed it to the floor contemptuously. Stopping beside Elida's gilded chair with the flame of Tarvalin in moonstones atop its high back, she slapped the folder and her own parchment down on the table, and then slapped Elida's face so hard she saw black flecks. "I thought we had settled this, Elida." The monstrous woman's voice made the snowstorm outside seem warm. "I know how to save the tower from your blunders, and I won't have you making new ones behind my back. If you persist, be assured that I will see you deposed, stilled, and howling under the birch before every initiate and even the servants." With an effort, Elida kept her hand away from her cheek. She did not need a mirror to tell her it was red. She had to be careful. Siain had found nothing yet, or she would have come. Alviarin could open her mouth before the hall and reveal the whole disastrous kidnapping of the Althor boy. She might see her deposed and stilled and birched with that alone, but Alviarin had another string to her bow. Tovain Ghazal was leading 50 sisters and 200 of the tower guard against a black tower Elida had been sure, when she gave the orders, held perhaps 2 or 3 men who could channel. Yet even with the hundreds, with Alviarin staring coldly down at her, that thought still curdled Elida's stomach. Even with hundreds of these Ashaman, she had hope for Tovain. The Black Tower would be rent in fire and blood, she had foretold, and sisters would walk its grounds. Surely that meant that somehow Tovain would triumph. More, the rest of the foretelling had told her that the tower would regain all its old glories under her, that Althor himself would quail at her anger. Alviarin had heard the words coming out of Elida's mouth when the foretelling took her, and she had not remembered later when she began her blackmail, had not understood her own doom. Elida waited in patience. She would repay the woman threefold, but she could be patient. For now. Making no attempt to hide her sneer, Alviarin pushed the folder aside and moved the single parchment in front of Elida. She flipped open the green and gold writing case, dipped Elida's pen in the inkwell, and thrust it at her. "Sign." Elida took the pen, wondering what madness she would be putting her name to this time. Yet another increase in the tower guard when the rebels would be done before there was any use for soldiers? Another attempt to make the Ajas reveal publicly which sisters headed them? That had certainly fallen on its nose. Reading quickly, she felt a knot of ice grow in her belly and keep growing. Giving each Aja final authority over any sister in its quarter, no matter her own Aja, had been the worst insanity so far. How could picking apart the very fabric of the tower save it? But this... The world now knows that Randall Thor is the Dragon Reborn. The world knows that he is a man who can touch the One Power. Such men have lain within the authority of the White Tower since time immemorial. The Dragon Reborn is granted the protection of the Tower, but whosoever attempts to approach him, save through the White Tower, lies attainted of treason against the light, and anathema is pronounced against them now and forever. The world may rest easily, knowing that the White Tower will safely guide the Dragon Reborn to the last battle and the inevitable triumph. Automatically, numbly, she added, "of the light," after triumph, but then her hand froze. Publicly acknowledging Althor as the Dragon Reborn could be borne, since he was, and this might lead many to accept the rumors that he had knelt to her already, which would prove useful. But the rest, she could not believe so much damage could be contained in so few words. "The light have mercy," she breathed fervently. "If this is proclaimed, it will be impossible to convince Althor that his abduction was unsanctioned. It would be hard enough without, but she had seen people convinced before that what had happened had not, and them in the middle of it happening. And he will be 10 times on his guard against another attempt. Alviarin, at best, this will frighten away a few of his followers. At best. Many likely had waded so deep with him they did not dare try to wade back. Certainly not if they thought anathema already hung over their heads. I might as well set fire to the tower with my own hand as sign this." Alviarin sighed impatiently. "You haven't forgotten your catechism, have you? Say it for me, as I taught you." Elida's lips compressed of their own accord. One pleasure in the woman's absence, not the greatest, but a very real pleasure, had been not being forced to repeat that vile litany every day. "I will do as I am told," she said at last in a flat voice. "She was the Amerlin's seat." "I will speak the words you tell me to speak, and no more." Her foretelling ordained her triumph, but oh, light, let it come soon. "I will sign what you tell me to sign, and nothing else. I am," she choked over the last, "I am obedient to your will." "You sound as if you need to be reminded of the truth of that," Alviarin said with another sigh. "I suppose I've left you alone too long." She tapped the parchment with a peremptory finger. "Sign." Elida signed, dragging the pen across the parchment. There was nothing else she could do. Alviarin barely waited for the pen's nib to lift before snatching up the decree. "I will seal this myself," she said, heading for the door. "I shouldn't have left the Amerlin seal where you could find it. I want to talk to you later. I have left it yourself too long. Be here when I return." "Later?" Elida said. "When? Alviarin? Alviarin?" The door closed behind the woman, leaving Elida to fume. Be there when Alviarin returned, confined to her quarters like a novice in the punishment cells. For a time she fingered her correspondence box, with its golden hawks fighting among white clouds in a blue sky, yet she could not make herself open it. With Alviarin gone, that box had begun once more to hold letters and reports of importance, not just the table scraps Alviarin let fall to her. Yet with the woman's return it might as well have been empty. Rising, she began rearranging the roses in their white vases, each atop a white marble plinth in a corner of the room. Blue roses, the most rare. Abruptly, she realized that she was staring at a broken rose stem in her hands, snapped in two. Half a dozen more littered the floor tiles. She made a vexed sound in her throat. She'd been thinking of her hands around Alviarin's throat. It was not the first time she had considered killing the woman, but Alviarin would have taken precautions. Sealed documents to be opened should anything untoward happen had no doubt been left with the last sisters Elida would suspect. That had been her one real worry during Alviarin's absence, that someone else might think the woman dead and come forward with the evidence that would drag the stole from her shoulders. Sooner or later, though, one way or another, Alviarin was finished, as surely as those roses were. "You didn't answer my knock, Mother, so I came on in," a woman said gruffly behind her. Elida turned, ready to flay with her tongue, but at the sight of the stocky, square-faced woman in a red-fringed shawl standing just inside the room, the blood drained from her own cheeks. "The keeper said you wanted to speak with me," Silviana said irritably. "About a private penance." Even to the Amerlin's seat, she made no effort to hide her disgust. Silviana believed private penance a ridiculous affectation. Penance was public. Only punishment took place in private. "She also asked me to remind you of something, but you rushed off before saying what?" She finished with a snort. Silviana saw anything that took time away from her novices and accepted as needless interruption. "I think I remember," Elida told her dully. When Silviana finally left, after only half an hour by the chimes of Simila's clock, yet an endless eternity, all that kept Elida from calling the hall to sit immediately so she could demand Alviarin be stripped of the keeper's stole was the certainty of her foretelling and the certainty that Ciane would trace that trail of treason back to Alviarin. That and the sure fact that whether or not Alviarin fell in the confrontation, she herself definitely would. So Elida do Avrinia Royhan, Watcher of the Seals, the Flame of Tarvalon, the Amerlin seat, surely the most powerful ruler in the world, lay face down on her bed and blubbered into her pillows, too tender to don the shift that lay discarded on the floor, certain that when Alviarin returned, the woman would insist on her sitting through the entire interview. She blubbered, and through her tears she prayed for Alviarin's downfall to come soon. "I did not tell you to have Elida beaten," that voice of crystal chimes said. "Do you rise above yourself?" Alviarin flung herself from her knees onto her belly before the woman who seemed made of dark shadows and silvery light. Seizing the hem of Messana's dress, she rained kisses on it. The weave of illusion, it must be that, though she could not see a single thread of Sidar any more than she could sense the ability to channel in the woman who stood over her, did not hold completely, with her frantically shifting the skirt's edge. Flickers of bronze silk with a thin border of intricately embroidered black scrollwork showed through. "I live to serve and obey you, great mistress," Alviarin panted between kisses. "I know that I am among the lowest of the low, a worm in your presence, and I pray only for your smile." She'd been punished once for rising above herself. Not for disobedience, thanks be to the great Lord of the Dark, and she knew that whatever howls Elida might be raising right then, they could not be half so loud as her own had been. Messana let the kissing go on for some time, and finally signaled an end by tipping Alviarin's face up with the toe of a slipper beneath the chin. "The decree has gone out?" It was not a question, but Alviarin answered hastily. "Yes, great mistress. Copies went to North Harbor and South Harbor even before I had Elida sign. The first couriers have gone, and no merchant will leave the city without copies to distribute." Messana knew all that, of course. She knew everything. A cramp tightened the back of Alviarin's awkwardly craned neck, but she did not move. Messana would tell her when to move. "Great mistress, Elida is an empty husk. With all humility, would it not be better without the need to use her?" She held her breath. Questions could be dangerous with the chosen. A shadow-nailed silvery finger tapped silver lips, pursed in an amused smile. "Better if you wore the Amerlin stole, child," Messana said at last. "An ambition small enough to fit you, but all in its time. For now, I have a tiny task for you. In spite of all the walls that have gone up between the Ajahs, the heads of the Ajahs seem to encounter one another with surprising frequency. By chance, they make it seem. All but the red, at least. A pity Galena got herself killed, or she could tell you what they are about. Very probably it is trivial, but you will learn why they bare teeth at one another in public, then whisper together in private. I hear and obey, great mistress, Alviarin replied promptly, grateful that Messana considered it unimportant. The great secret of who headed the Ajahs was none to her. Every black sister was required to relay to the Supreme Council every whisper inside her supposed Ajah, but only Galena among them had been black. That meant querying the black sisters among the sitters, which meant going through all the layers between them and her. That would take time, and without any certainty of success. Except for Ferain Neheran and Suana Dragand, who were the heads of their Ajahs, sitters rarely seemed to know what their Ajah's head was thinking until they were told. I will tell you as soon as I learn, great mistress. But she did file away a tidbit for herself. Trivial matter or not, Messana did not know everything that happened in the White Tower, and Alviarin would keep her eyes open for a sister in bronze skirts bordered on the hem in black scrollwork. Messana was hiding herself in the tower, and knowledge was power. Chapter 26. The Extra Bit. Siain strode the hallways of the tower with a growing sense of being confounded at every turn. The White Tower was quite large, true, but she had been at this for hours. She very much wanted to be snug in her own rooms. Despite casements in place in every window, drafts drifted along the broad tapestry-hung corridors and made the stand lamps flicker. Cold drafts, and difficult to ignore when they slipped under her skirts. Her rooms were warm and comfortable and safe. Maids bobbed curtsies and manservants bowed in her wake, half seen and completely ignored. Most sisters were in their own Ajah's quarters, and those few out and about moved with wary pride, often in pairs, always of the same Ajah, shawls spread along their arms and displayed like banners. She smiled and nodded pleasantly to Talene, but the statuesque, golden-haired sitter returned a hard stare, beauty carved from ice, then stalked away, twitching her green-fringed shawl. Too late now to approach Talene about being part of the search, even had Pevara been agreeable. Pevara counseled caution, then more caution, and truth to tell, Siain was more than willing to listen under the circumstances. It was just that Talene was a friend, had been a friend. Talene was not the worst. Several ordinary sisters sniffed at her openly, at a sitter. None white, of course, but that should have made no difference. No matter what was going on in the tower, proprieties should be observed. Jewelaine Madoma, a tall, attractive woman with short-cut black hair who had held a chair for the Brown less than a year, brushed past her without so much as a murmur of apology, and went off with those mannish strides of hers. Saerin Asnobar, another brown sitter, gave Siain a fierce scowl and fingered that curved knife she always carried behind her belt before disappearing down a side corridor. Saerin was Altaran, slight touches of white at her dark temples, emphasizing a thin, age-faded white scar across one olive cheek, and only a warder could match her for scowling. Perhaps these things were all to be expected. There had been several unfortunate incidents recently, and no sister would forget being bundled unceremoniously from the hallways around another Ajah's quarters, much less what had sometimes gone with it. Rumor said a sitter had had more than her dignity ruffled by the Reds, though not who. A great pity the hall could not obstruct Elida's mad decree, but first one Ajah, then another had leaped on the new prerogatives. Few sitters were willing to think of giving them up, now they were in place, and the result was a tower divided very nearly into armed camps. Once Siain had thought the air in the tower felt like a quivering hot jelly of suspicion and backbiting. Now it was quivering hot jelly with an acid bite. Clicking her tongue in vexation, she adjusted her own white-fringed shawl as Saren vanished. It was illogical to flinch because an Altaran scowled. Even Saren would go no further, surely not. And more than illogical to worry over what she could not change when she had a task. And then, after all of her search that morning, she took a single step and saw her long-sought quarry walking toward her. Zara Dakan was a slim, black-haired girl with a prideful air, properly self-possessed, and by all outward evidence untouched by the heated currents flowing through the tower these days. Well, not a girl precisely, but Siain was sure she had not worn that white-fringed shawl 50 years yet. She was inexperienced. Relatively inexperienced. That might help.
I'll be right back.
Zara made no move to avoid a sitter of her own Ajah, bowing her head in respect as Siain fell in beside her. Quite a lot of intricate golden embroidery climbed the sleeves of her snowy dress and made a wide band at the bottom of her skirt. It was an unusual degree of show for the white Ajah. "Sitter," she murmured. Did her blue eyes hold a touch of worry? "I need you for something," Siain said more calmly than she felt. Very likely she was transplanting her own feelings into Zara's big eyes. "Come with me." There was nothing to fear, not in the heart of the White Tower, but keeping her hands folded at her waist, unclenched, required surprising effort. As expected, as hoped, Zara went along with only another murmur, this of acquiescence. She glided at Siain's side quite gracefully as they descended broad marble staircases and wide curving ramps, and gave only the slightest frown when Siain opened a door onto the ground floor, onto narrow stairs that spiraled down into darkness. "After you, sister," Siain said, channeling a small ball of light. By protocol, she should have preceded the other woman, but she could not bring herself to do that. Zara did not hesitate in going down. Logically, she had nothing to fear from a sitter, a white sitter. Logically, Siain would tell her what she wanted when the time was ripe, and it would be nothing she could not do. Illogically, Siain's stomach fluttered like a huge moth. Light. She held Saidar and the other woman did not. Zara was weaker in any case. There was nothing to fear, which did nothing to quiet those fluttering wings in her middle. Down they climbed and down, past doors letting onto basements and sub-basements until they reached the very lowest level, below even where the accepted were tested. The dark hallway was lit only by Siain's small light. They held their skirts high, but their slippers kicked up small clouds of dust however carefully they stepped. Plain wooden doors lined the smooth stone walls, many with great lumps of rust for hinges and locks. "Sitter," Zara asked, finally showing doubt, "whatever can we be after down here? I don't believe anyone has been this deep for years." Siain was sure her own visit a few days earlier had been the first to this level in at least a century. That was one of the reasons she and Pevara had chosen it. "Just in here," she said, swinging open a door that moved with only a little squealing. No amount of oil could loosen all the rust, and efforts to use the power had been useless. Her abilities with Earth were better than Pevara's, but that was not saying very much. Zara stepped in and blinked in surprise. In an otherwise empty room, Pevara sat behind a sturdy, if rather worn table with 3 small benches around it. Getting those few pieces down unseen had been difficult, especially when servants could not be trusted. Clearing out the dust had been much simpler, if no more pleasant, and smoothing the dust in the hall outside, necessary after every visit, had been simply onerous. "I was about to give up sitting here in the dark," Pevara growled. The glow of Saidar surrounded her as she lifted a lantern from beneath the table and channeled it alight, casting as much illumination as the rough-walled former storeroom deserved. Somewhat plump and normally pretty, the red sitter looked a bear with 2 sore teeth. "We want to ask you a few questions, Zara." And she shielded the woman as Siain shut the door. Zara's shadowed face remained utterly calm, but she swallowed audibly. "About what, sitters?" There was the faintest tremor in the younger woman's voice as well. It could be simply the mood of the tower, though. The Black Aja, Pevara replied curtly. We want to know whether you're a dark friend. Amazement and outrage shattered Zara's calm. Most would have taken that for sufficient denial without her snapped, I don't have to take that from you. You Reds have been setting up false dragons for years. If you ask me, there's no need to look further than the Red Quarters to find Black Sisters. Pevara's face darkened with fury. Her loyalty to her Aja was strong, which went without saying, but worse, she had lost her entire family to dark friends. Siain decided to step in before Pevara resorted to brute force. They had no proof. Not yet. Sit, Sarah, she said with as much warmth as she could muster. Sit down, sister. Zara turned toward the door as though she might disobey an order from a sitter and of her own Aja. But at last she settled onto one of the benches, stiffly, sitting right at the edge. Before Siain had finished taking a seat that placed Zara between them, Pevara laid the ivory-white oath rod on the battered tabletop. Siain sighed. They were sitters with a perfect right to use any ter'angreal they wished, but she had been the one to filch it. She could not help thinking of it as filching when she had observed none of the proper procedures. And the whole time in the back of her head, she had been sure she would turn to find long-dead Sorela Bagand standing here, ready to haul her off to the mistress of novices' study by her ear. Irrational, but no less real. We want to make sure you tell the truth, Pevara said, still sounding like an angry bear. So you will swear an oath on this, and then I'll ask again. I should not be subjected to this, Zara said with an accusing look at Siain. But I will re-swear all of the oaths, if that's what it needs to satisfy you. And I will demand an apology from you both afterward. She hardly sounded like a woman shielded, and asked such a question. Almost contemptuously, she reached for the slim, foot-long rod. It shone in the dim light of the lantern. You'll swear to obey the two of us absolutely, Pevara told her, and that hand snatched back as if from a coiled viper. Pevara went right on, even sliding the rod closer to the woman with 2 fingers. That way we can tell you to answer truthfully and know you will. And if you give the wrong answer, we can know you'll be obedient and helpful in helping us hunt down your Black Sisters. The rod can be used to free you of the oath, if you give the right answer. To free? Zara exclaimed. I've never heard of anyone being loosed from an oath on the oath rod. That is why we are taking all these precautions, Siain told her. Logically, a Black Sister must be able to lie, which means she must have freed of at least that oath and likely all 3. Pevara and I tested and found the procedure much the same as taking an oath. She did not mention how painful it had been, though, leaving the pair of them weeping. She also did not mention that Zara would not be freed of her oath, whatever her answer, not until the search for the Black Aja came to a conclusion. For one thing, she could not be allowed to run off and complain about this questioning, which she most certainly would with every right, if she was not of the Black. If. Light but Siain wished they'd found a sister from another Aja who fit the criteria they had set. A green or a yellow would have done quite nicely. That lot were overweening at the best of times, and of late, no. She was not going to fall prey to the sickness spreading through the tower. Yet she could not help the names that flashed through her head. 12 greens, twice as many yellows, and every one long past you, taking down a few rungs. Sniff at a sitter? You freed yourselves from one of the oaths? Zara sounded startled, disgusted, uneasy, all at the same time. Perfectly reasonable responses. And took it again, Pevara muttered impatiently. Snatching up the slim rod, she channeled a little spirit into one end while maintaining Zara's shield. Under the light, I vow to speak no word that is not true. Under the light, I vow to make no weapon for one man to kill another. Under the light, I vow not to use the one power as a weapon except against shadow spawn, or in the last defense of my life, the life of my warder, or that of another sister. She did not grimace over the part about warders. New sisters bound for the Red often did. I am not a dark friend. I hope that satisfies you. She showed Zera her teeth, but whether in smile or snarl was hard to say. Siang retook the oaths in turn, each producing a slight momentary pressure everywhere from her scalp to the soles of her feet. In truth, the pressure was difficult to detect at all, with her skin still feeling too tight from retaking the oath against speaking a lie. Claiming that Pevara had a beard or that the streets of Tarvalin were paved with cheese had been strangely exhilarating for a time. Even Pevara had giggled, but hardly worth the discomfort now. Testing had not really seemed necessary to her. Logically, it must be so. Saying that she was not of the black twisted her tongue, a vile thing to be forced to deny, but she handed Zara the oath rod with a decisive nod. Shifting on her bench, the slender woman turned the smooth white rod in her fingers, swallowing convulsively. The pale lantern light made her appear ill. She looked from one of them to the other, wide-eyed. Then her hands tightened on the rod, and she nodded. Exactly as I said, Pevara growled, channeling spirit to the rod again. Or you'll be swearing until you have it right. I vow to obey the two of you absolutely, Zara said in a tight voice, then shuddered as the oath took hold. It was always tighter at the first. Ask me about the Black Aja, she demanded. Her hands shook, holding the rod. Ask me about the Black Aja. Her intensity told Siang the answer even before Pevara released the flow of spirit and asked the question, commanding utter truth. No, Zara practically shouted. No, I am not Black Aja. Now take this oath from me. Free me. Siang slumped dejectedly, resting her elbows on the table. She certainly had not wanted Zara to answer yes, but she had been sure they had found the other woman out in a lie. One lie found, or so it had seemed, after weeks of searching. How many more weeks of searching lay ahead? And of looking over her shoulder from waking to sleeping, when she managed to sleep. Pevara stabbed an accusing finger at the woman. You told people that you came from the north. Zara's eyes went wide again. I did, she said slowly. I rode down the bank of the Aranin to Jualda. Now free me of this oath. She licked her lips. Siang frowned at her. Golden thorn seeds and a red cocklebur were found on your saddlecloth, Zara. Golden thorn and red cocklebur can't be found for 100 miles south of Tarvalin. Zara leaped to her feet, and Pevara snapped, Sit down! The woman dropped onto the bench with a loud smack, but she did not even wince. She was trembling, no, shaking. Her mouth was clamped shut, otherwise Siang was sure her teeth would have been chattering. Light, the question of north or south, frightened her more than an accusation of being a dark friend. From where did you start out? Siang asked slowly. And why? She meant to ask why the woman had gone roundabout, which plainly she had, just to hide which direction she came from, but answers burst from Zara's mouth. From Saladar, she squealed. There was no other word for it. Still clutching the oath rod, she writhed on her bench. Tears spilled from her eyes as wide as they would go and fixed on Pevara. Words poured out, though her teeth truly did chatter now. I came to make sure all the sisters here know about the Reds and Loghain, so they'll depose Elida, and the tower can be whole again. With a wail, she collapsed into open-mouthed bawling as she stared at the red sitter. Well, Pevara said. Then again, more grimly, well. Her face was all composure, but the glitter in her dark eyes was far from the mischief Siang remembered as novice and accepted. So you are the source of that rumor. You are going to stand before the hall and reveal it for the lie it is. Admit the lie, girl. If Zara's eyes had been wide before, they bulged now. The rod dropped from her hands to roll across the tabletop, and she clutched her throat. A choking sound came from her suddenly gaping mouth. Pevara stared at her in shock, but suddenly Siang understood. Light's mercy, she breathed. You do not have to lie, Zara. Zara's legs thrashed beneath the table as if she were trying to rise and could not get her feet under her. Tell her, Pivara. She believes it's true. You've commanded her to speak the truth and to lie. Don't look at me that way. She believes. A bluish tinge appeared on Zara's lips. Her eyelids fluttered. Siain gathered calm with both hands. Pivara, you gave the order, so apparently you must release her or she will suffocate right in front of us. She's a rebel. Pivara's mutter invested that word with all the scorn it could hold. But then she sighed. She hasn't been tried yet. You don't have to lie, girl. Zara toppled forward and lay with her cheek pressed against the tabletop, gulping air between whimpers. Siain shook her head in wonder. They had not considered the possibility of conflicting oaths. What if the Black Ajah did not merely remove the oath against lying, but replaced it with one of their own? What if they replaced all three with their own oaths? She and Pivara would need to go very carefully if they did find a Black sister, or they might have her fall dead before they all knew what the conflict was. Perhaps first a renunciation of all oaths. No way to go about it more carefully without knowing what Black sisters swore, followed by retaking the three? Light. The pain of being loosed from everything at once would be little short of being put to the question. Maybe not short of it at all, but certainly a dark friend deserved that and more, if they ever found one. Pivara glared down at the gasping woman without the slightest touch of pity on her face. When she stands trial for rebellion, I intend to sit on her court. When she is tried, Pivara, Siain said thoughtfully. A pity to lose the assistance of one we know isn't a dark friend. And since she is a rebel, we need not be overly concerned about using her. There had been a number of discussions, none to a conclusion, about the second reason for leaving the new oath in place. A sister sworn to obey could be compelled. Siain shifted uneasily. That sounded entirely too close to the forbidden vileness of compulsion. She could be induced to help in the hunt, so long as you did not mind forcing her to accept the danger, whether she wished to or not. I cannot think they would send only one, she went on. Zara, how many of you came to spread this tale? 10, the woman mumbled against the tabletop, then jerked erect, glaring in defiance. I will not betray my sisters. I won't. Abruptly, she cut off, lips twisting bitterly as she realized she had done just that. Names, Pivara barked. Give me their names, or I will have your hide here and now. Names spilled from Zara's unwilling lips. At the command, certainly, more than the threat. Looking at Pivara's grim face, though, Siain was sure she needed little provocation to stripe Zara like a novice caught stealing. Strangely, she herself did not feel the same animosity. Revulsion, yes, but clearly not as strong. The woman was a rebel who had helped break the White Tower when a sister must accept anything to keep the tower whole, and yet... very strange. You agree, Pivara? She said when the list concluded. The stubborn woman gave her only a fierce nod for agreement. Very well. Zara, you will bring Bernila to my rooms this afternoon. There were 2 from each Ajah, excepting the blue and the red, it seemed, but best to begin with the other white. You will say only that I wish to speak to her on a private matter. You will give her no warning by word, deed, or omission. Then you will stand quietly and let Pivara and me do what is necessary. You are being recruited into a worthier cause than your misguided rebellion, Zara. Of course it was misguided, no matter how mad with power Elida had become. You are going to help us hunt down the Black Ajah. Zara's head jerked unwilling nods at each injunction, her face pained. But at mention of a hunt for the Black Ajah, she gasped. Lights. Her wits must have been totally unhinged by her experiences not to see that. And you will stop spreading these stories, Pivara put in sternly. From this moment you'll not mention the Red Ajah and false dragons together. Am I understood? Zara's face donned a mask of sullen stubbornness. Zara's mouth said, I understand, sitter. She looked ready to begin weeping again from sheer frustration. "Then get out of my sight," Pivara told her, releasing the shield and Saidar together. "And compose yourself. Wash your face and straighten your hair." That last was directed at the back of the woman already darting from the table. Zara had to pull her hands away from her hair to open the door. As the door squeaked shut behind her, Pivara snorted. "I wouldn't put it past her to have gone to this Bernila like a sloven, hoping to warn her that way." "A valid point," Siain admitted. "But who will we warn if we scowl right and left at these women? At the very least, we will attract notice." "The way matters are, Siain, we wouldn't attract notice kicking them across the tower grounds." Pivara sounded as if that were an attractive notion. "They are rebels, and I intend to hold them so hard they squeak if one of them so much as has a wrong thought." They went round and round about that. Siain insisted that care in the orders they gave, leaving no loopholes, would be sufficient. Pivara pointed out that they were letting 10 rebels, 10, walk the tower's halls unpunished. Siain said they would face punishment eventually, and Pivara growled that eventually was not soon enough. Siain had always admired the other woman's strength of will, but really, sometimes it was pure stubbornness. A faint creak from a hinge was all the warning Siain had to snatch the oath rod into her lap, hiding it in folds of her skirt as the door opened wide. She and Pivara embraced the source almost as one. Saren walked into the room calmly, holding a lantern, and stood aside for Talene, who was followed by tiny Yukiri with a second light, and boyishly slim Dosine, tall for a Kairienin, who closed the door quite firmly and settled her back against it as if to keep anyone from leaving. 4 sitters representing all the remaining Ajas in the tower. They seemed to ignore the fact that Siain and Pivara held Saidar. Suddenly, to Siain, the room felt rather crowded. Imagination and irrational, but... "Strange to see the pair of you together," Saren said. Her face might be serene, but she slid fingers along the hilt of that curved knife behind her belt. She'd held her chair 40 years, longer than anyone else in the hall, and everyone had learned to be careful of her temper. "We might say the same of you," Pivara replied dryly. "Saren's temper never upset her. Or did you come down here to help Dosine try to get some of her own back?" A sudden flush made the Yellow's face look even more that of a pretty boy despite her elegant bearing, and told Siain which sitter had strayed too near the red quarters with unfortunate results. "I wouldn't have thought that would bring you together, though. Greens at Yellow's throats, browns at Gray's. Or did you just bring them down for a quiet duel, Saren?" Frantically, Siain cast around for what reason would have these 4 this deep into the bedrock of Tarvalon. What could tie them together? Their Ajas, all of the Ajas, truly were at one another's throats. All 4 had been handed penances by Elida. No sitter could enjoy labor, especially when everyone knew exactly why she was scrubbing floors or pots, yet that was hardly a bond. What else? None were nobly born. Saren and Yukiri were the daughters of innkeepers, Talene of farmers, while Dosine's father had been a cutler. Saren had been trained first by the Daughters of Silence, the only one of that lot to reach the shawl. Absolutely useless drivel. Suddenly something did strike her and dried her throat. Saren, with her temper often barely in rein. Dosine, who had actually run away 3 times as a novice, though she had only once made it as far as the bridges. Talene, who might have earned more punishments than any other novice in the history of the tower. Yukiri, always the last Gray to join her sister's consensus when she wanted to go another way, the last to join the halls, for that matter. All 4 were considered rebels in a way, and Elida had humiliated every one. Could they be thinking they had made a mistake, standing to depose Swan and raise Elida? Could they have found out about Zara and the others? And if so, what did they intend to do? Mentally, Siain prepared herself to weave Saidar, though without much hope that she could escape. Pivara matched Saren and Yukiri in strength, but she herself was weaker than any here save Dosine. She prepared herself, and Talene stepped forward and burst all of her logical deductions to flinders. Yukiri noticed you two sneaking about together, and we want to know why. Her surprisingly deep voice held heat, despite the ice that seemed to coat her face. Did the heads of your Ajas set you a secret task? In public, the Ajas' heads snarl at one another worse than anyone else, but they've been sneaking off into corners to talk, it seems. Whatever they're scheming, the Hall has a right to know. Oh, do give over, Taline. Yukiri's voice was always an even bigger surprise than Taline's. The woman looked a miniature queen in dark silver silk with ivory lace, but she sounded a comfortable countrywoman. She claimed the contrast helped in negotiations. She smiled at Siane and Pevara, a monarch perhaps unsure how gracious she should be. I saw the pair of you sniffing about like ferrets at the hen coop, she said, but I held my tongue. You might be pillow friends for all I know, and whose business is that but yours? I held my tongue till Taline here started yelping about who's been huddling in corners. I've seen a bit of huddling in corners myself, and I suspect some of those women might head their Ajas as well, so sometimes 6 and 6 make a dozen, and sometimes they make a mess. Tell us if you can now. The Hall does have a right. We're not leaving until you do tell, Taline put in even more heatedly than before. Pevara snorted and folded her arms. If the head of my Aja spoke 2 words to me, I'd see no reason to tell you what they were. As it happens, what Siane and I were discussing has nothing to do with the red or the white. Snoop elsewhere. But she did not release Saidar. Neither did Siane. Bloody useless, and I bloody knew it, Docine muttered from her place by the door. Why I ever flaming let you talk me into this? Just as bloody well nobody else knows, or we'd have sheep's wallop all over faces for the whole bloody tower to see. At times she had a tongue like a boy, too, a boy who needed his mouth washed out. Siane would have stood to leave if she had not feared her knees would betray her. Pevara did stand, and raised an impatient eyebrow at the women between her and the door. Sarin fingered her knife hilt and eyed them quizzically, not shifting a step. A puzzle, she murmured. Suddenly she glided forward, her free hand dipping into Siane's lap so quickly that Siane gasped. She tried to keep the oath rod hidden, but the only result was that she ended with Sarin holding the rod waist-high with one hand, while she held the other end and a fistful of her skirts. I enjoy puzzles, Sarin said. Siane let go and adjusted her dress. There seemed nothing else to do. The appearance of the rod produced a momentary babble as nearly everyone spoke at once. Blood and fire, Docine growled. Are you down here raising new bloody sisters? Oh, leave it with them, Sarin. Yukiri laughed right on top of her. Whatever they're up to, it's their own business. Atop both, Taline barked. Why else are they sneaking about together, if it isn't to do with the Aja heads? Sarin waved a hand and after a moment gained quiet. All present were sitters, but she had the right to speak first in the hall, and her 40 years counted for something too. This is the key to the puzzle, I think, she said, stroking the rod with her thumb. Why this, after all? Abruptly, the glow of Saidar surrounded her, too, and she channeled spirit to the rod. Under the light I will speak no word that is not true. I am not a dark friend. In the silence that followed, a mouse sneezing would have sounded loud. Am I right? Sarin said, releasing the power. She held the rod out toward Siane. For the 3rd time, Siane retook the oath against lying, and for the 2nd time repeated that she was not of the black. Pevara did the same with frozen dignity, and eyes sharp as an eagle's. This is ridiculous, Taline said. There is no black Aja. Yukiri took the rod from Pevara and channeled. Under the light I will speak no word that is not true. I am not black Aja. The light of Saidar around her winked out, and she handed the rod to Docine. Taline frowned in disgust. Stand aside, Docine. I, for one, will not put up with this filthy suggestion. Under the light, I will speak no word that is not true, Docine said almost reverently, the glow around her like a halo. I am not of the black Aja. When matters were serious, Her tongue was as clean as any mistress of novices could have wished. She extended the rod to Talene. The golden-haired woman started back as from a poisonous snake. Even to ask this is a slander. Worse than slander. Something feral moved in her eyes. An irrational thought, perhaps, but that was what Siain saw. "Now move out of my way," Talene demanded, with all the authority of a sitter in her voice. "I am leaving." "I think not," Kavara said quietly, and Yukiri nodded slowly in agreement. Saerin did not stroke her knife hilt. She gripped it till her knuckles went white. Riding through the deep snows of Andor, floundering through them, Tovain Ghazal cursed the day she was born. Short and slightly plump, with smooth copper skin and long, glossy, dark hair, she had seemed pretty to many over the years, but none had ever called her beautiful. Certainly none would now. The dark eyes that had once been direct now bored into whatever she looked at. That was when she was not angry. She was angry today. When Tovain was angry, serpents fled. 4 other Reds rode, floundered, at her back, and behind them 20 of the tower guard in dark coats and cloaks. None of the men liked it that their armor was stowed away on the pack horses, and they watched the forest lining both sides of the road as though expecting attack any moment. How they thought to cross 300 miles of Andor unnoticed, wearing coats and cloaks with the flame of Tar Valon shining bright on them, Tovain could not imagine. The journey was almost done, though. In another day, perhaps 2, with roads knee-deep in snow on the horses, she would join with 9 other parties exactly like hers. Not all of the sisters in them were Red, unfortunately, but that did not trouble her overmuch. Tovain Ghazal, once a sitter for the Red, would go into the histories as the woman who destroyed this Black Tower. She was sure Elida thought her grateful for the chance, called back from exile and disgrace, given the opportunity for redemption. She sneered, and if a wolf had been looking into the deep hood of her cloak, it might have quailed. What had been done 20 years ago was necessary, and the light burned all those who muttered that the Black Aja must have been involved. It had been necessary and right, but Tovain Ghazal had been driven from her chair in the hall and forced to howl for mercy under the birch, with the assembled sisters watching, and even novices and accepted witnessing that sitters too lay beneath the law, though they were not told what law. And then she had been sent to work these last 20 years on the isolated Black Hills farm of Mistress Jara Doweel, a woman who considered an Aes Sedai serving penance in exile no different from any other hand laboring in sun and snow. Tovain's hands shifted on her reins. She could feel the calluses. Mistress Doweel, even now she could not think of the woman without the honorific she had demanded. Mistress Doweel believed in hard work, and discipline as tight as any novice faced. She had no mercy on anyone who tried to shirk the back-breaking labor that she herself shared, and less than none for a woman who sneaked away to comfort herself with a pretty boy. That had been Tovain's life these past 20 years, and Elida had slipped through the cracks uncaught, danced her way to the Amerlin seat that Tovain had once dreamed of for herself. No, she was not grateful, but she had learned to wait her chance. Abruptly, a tall man in a black coat, dark hair falling to his shoulders, spurred his horse out of the forest into the road ahead of her, spraying snow. "There's no point struggling," he announced firmly, raising a gloved hand. "Surrender peacefully, and no one will be hurt." It was neither his appearance nor his words that made Tovain rein up short, letting the other sisters gather beside her. "Take him," she said calmly. "You had better link. He has me shielded." It seemed one of these Ashaman had come to her.
Cheers.
How convenient of him. Abruptly she realized that nothing was happening and took her eyes from the fellow to frown at Jennair. The woman's pale, square face seemed absolutely bloodless. "Tovain," she said unsteadily, "I also am shielded." "I am shielded too," Lamai breathed in disbelief, and the others chimed in, increasingly frantic. All shielded. More men in black coats appeared from among the trees, their horses stepping slowly all around. Tovane stopped counting at 15. The guards muttered angrily, waiting on a sister's command. They knew nothing yet except that a band of rogues had waylaid them. Tovane clicked her tongue in irritation. These men could not all channel, of course, but apparently every Ashaman who could do so had come against her. She did not panic. Unlike some of the sisters with her, these were not the first men who channeled that she had confronted. The tall man began riding toward her, smiling, apparently thinking they had obeyed his ridiculous order. "At my command," she said quietly, "we will break in every direction. As soon as you are far enough away that the man loses the shield—" Men always thought they had to be able to see to hold their weaves, which meant that they did have to. "Turn back and help the guards. Ready yourselves." She raised her voice to a shout. "Guardsmen, fight them!" Roaring, the guardsmen surged forward, waving their swords and no doubt thinking to surround and protect the sisters. Pulling her mare around to the right, Tovane dug in her heels and crouched low over Sparrow's neck, dodging between startled guardsmen, then between two very young men in black coats who gaped at her in astonishment. Then she was into the trees, urging more speed, snow spraying wildly, careless of what...
All right, everyone, I'm going to call into this light for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by. Excuse me. Everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe. Have a good thing.